People are fleeing our state. Businesses don't want to expand here. Some don't want to stay here.
The biggest issue facing Connecticut is the exodus of jobs and businesses from our state.
One of the worst problems Connecticut has right now is spending.
We now have the unwanted distinction in Connecticut of being the highest tax state in America.
The proof is in the pudding. We're in the worst place out of the nation in this state, and it's time that we start to rebuild it. And with Bob's plan, as far as cutting taxes, letting that money go back into the economy.
With all his turnaround experiences with major corporations, I think is something that really will benefit Connecticut.
And I was also Chief Financial Officer of UBS Investment Bank. That's a business with a $500 billion balance sheet. I am used to turning things around, and when you think about the state of Connecticut, it is a big, complicated organization that needs to be turned around.
I think that's exactly what...
And welcome to The Buzz. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman. We have Chris Calandra in Studio B. We have a great show today. We have a political and a /motivational show as well. We have two guests joining us. Bob Stefanowski is running for governor for obviously the state of Connecticut, and he's in the Republican side. Before we put him on, Chris, it said in his ad, we played a segment of it, a portion of it, that he's a turnaround specialist. I think, would you agree or not that Connecticut at this particular point in time, with 8 years of Dana Malloy and a Democratic legislature, needs a turnaround artist?
I do think we need a turnaround in Connecticut. We're losing way too many battles on the economic and business front, and our finances are in shambles. So, yes, I think so. Whether a business owner could cross over into the political realm to lead that, or if it will be a politician remains to be seen. It's an open field.
I can't even keep track. It's like 5 pages of how many people are running. Totally crazy. But without further ado, we have Bob Stefanowski. He's on the Republican side, business person, turnaround specialist, running for Connecticut governor. Bob, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Great.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. And you heard your snippet of your ad, I believe.
Thank you.
And we also played a little snippet of Governor Malloy's final State of the State address. And Chris Calandra is in Studio B. He actually saw the whole speech. Pretty telling, actually, on how I don't know. I mean, the only thing I can say is lack of competency. I mean, how are you talking about all these things when it's like your house is burning and you're worried about the daffodils not being planted? Pretty alarming, isn't it?
Well, it's classic Dan Malloy. I mean, you've had 8 years of absolutely horrible economic policy, tax and spend, taxes in infinite different forms. They're trying to put taxes back in the form of tolls. And for him to have a State of the State address that doesn't mention one of the worst economies in Connecticut in the entire nation and talks about fairness rather than, the severe economic issues that this...
Well, isn't fairness this a code word for redistribution?
It could be. I mean, it's a pretty nebulous term. I mean, coming out of the business world, one of the things I learned is you got to focus on specific tangible things that you can change, and running around with general platitudes or high-level thoughts when you're in a state of emergency, which is really what this state is in right now from an economic perspective, that's not the leadership we need right now.
Yes. Chris, you have a question for Bob?
Yeah, so given your ad and your business experience, I understand that you had a successful tenure with GE and also with UBS and probably others. How do you think that business experience will translate to the governorship?
Yeah, Chris, if you look at what's important for a governor role, or quite honestly any chief executive officer role, you need to have integrity. You need to be able to make tough decisions. You need to be able to budget. When I was chief financial officer of UBS Investment Bank, we had a $500 billion asset base spread across 35 countries that we hit our budget every single year. You need to be able to have tough discussions. I've been having tough discussions at GE and other places with unions for 25 years. You need to be able to collaborate. One of your clips was that Dan Malloy wasn't even in the budget discussions. That just wouldn't happen in the private sector. So having somebody with that skill set, being able to collaborate, showing leadership, being able to rally people around the cause is exactly what we need in our next governor. And somebody who's proven it in the business world, I think, is ideal. And the other thing I'll say before I turn it back to you is people don't want another politician to replace Dan Malloy. Before I even got into the race, we did a poll. We used Donald Trump's pollster, John McLaughlin, and we asked people, do you want another politician to replace Dan Malloy? 80% people said no. They want an outsider. They want someone with pragmatic business experience. They want somebody who's actually had a job in their life.
Well, before we throw out to Chris, I just want to interject. This is Jeff. And it's a convoluted, complicated concept somewhat. And I think we talked about it before you came on the show, and Chris and I have discussed it. In previous times, I would agree with you 100%. But has the left reinvented the playing field to such a good job that, yes, the economy is important, but things like identity politics and those types of things, are more emotionally based arguments, still win the day?
Well, they try, but I think we've got to keep people focused on the facts. And we've had 8 years of horrible economic policy. The other part of the poll, I asked, people that are expected to vote what their top 3 issues were. It was jobs, it was the economy, and it was taxes. So you know what they say, people vote with their checkbooks, and people want to have a situation in Connecticut where the economy is thriving. We need to get our tax rate down. We need to reduce the size of government. We need to get our budget back into balance. And all of those things are skill sets that I've developed over the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm. In terms of taxes, maybe you can discuss how are you going to basically gradually eliminate the state income tax, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that and still balance the budget? I'm sure that's a question that's going to be asked of you.
So I put a plan together with Dr. Arthur Laffer. I've known Art for 30 years. Art was Ronald Reagan's chief economist, and he just helped Donald Trump with his tax plan. It's on my website, bobforgovernor.com. And it talks about how we gradually get rid of the state income tax. We can't do it day one. There's too big of a deficit, but we have to start to chip away at it. The estate tax, or the death tax, as it's famously called, we're one of the only states in the entire country that still has a gift tax and a death tax. And we lose $6 billion of taxable income just to the state of Florida for people that want to avoid that tax. So we are the classic example of dysfunctional tax policy, where we're driving more tax dollars away from the state than what we're receiving. So a gradual phase out of the income tax, elimination of the death tax, institute a taxpayer bill of rights, which allows for term limits, referendum, initiative recall, giving the power back to the citizens of our state and getting it out of the hands of people like Dan Malloy and all of his cronies up in Hartford.
So, in addition to reducing the state income tax gradually over time, how many years, by the way, does your plan call for it to decline and eventually disappear?
I've got it coming out over 8 years. It'll be tied to revenue triggers, meaning that we will only do it if we can afford it, if the tax revenues hit a certain level. But we have to start chipping away at it. If you look at the states that do not have a state income tax, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, they all have billion-dollar budget surpluses.
That's right. And they're killing it economically. They're attracting businesses. They're creating new jobs. They're becoming wealthier. And money is flowing into the state coffers because of that economic growth. We have the exact opposite that's happening in Connecticut. What I wanted to ask you, though, is in addition to the taxes, which is a great signal to the business community that will be more friendly, perhaps, what other steps can be done either on tax policy or other policy to help Connecticut retain its businesses and maybe even attract new businesses or make it friendly for new startup formation?
You know, when I talk to medium-sized business owners across the state, I've got a couple dozen of them on my economic council, there's really 3 things that, and the first one didn't surprise me. It was the high level of taxes. The second one didn't surprise me, which is the incredible amount of regulatory hurdles that people have to get over to start a new business, to maintain a new business. The third one did surprise me a little bit, which is a qualified workforce. And I would have thought with Connecticut's institutions and colleges that would not have been an issue. But many of these middle-sized businesses are looking for a different skill set. And we need to do a much better job communicating with our trade schools about what are the skill sets that people really need, and how do we provide that feeder into these mid-sized Connecticut companies that desperately need it.
Good. That's a good answer. I like that a lot. Let me ask you this. I had an interesting experience today because my wife and I went shopping for a mattress, and you know how excited on my day off that I was able to go shopping, let alone for a mattress. But
you can do that over the internet now.
Yeah. So nonetheless, we went into a store. We pick out a mattress. We're checking out with the person that works at the furniture store, and she pointed out that there was some tax on removal of mattresses, and the particulars aren't that important, but it surprised me. Now, we don't know this woman from a hole in the wall, of course, but she started talking about, boy, Connecticut taxes everything that moves. Things are really bad. And so my question is, because I'm assuming that this person is not part of the top 1% of the economic structure in the state, I don't know anything about her, but I'm going to make that assumption. So it seems troubling that Connecticut is on a losing mindset. Everybody kind of accepts begrudgingly that we're losing, that we're taxed a lot, and things aren't going well. As governor, how do you change not just the policy, but the attitude and kind of be the cheerleader in chief for a turnaround? Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, every turnaround I've ever been involved with, you have to start somewhere. And if you start to chip away at it, the attitude of the organization can change very quickly. Look at what Trump's tax plan has done for the stock market and the job reports for the last 30 to 90 days. You can start to have a big impact. The problem with this governor and the people around him is they just find new ways to create taxes. You heard the latest is to have a tax on every tire sold in Connecticut, $3 per tire. I mean, it's just silly. How do you go about fixing an economy that's in the disastrous state that we're in by charging $3 per tire that's sold? It's just wasted effort.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the only thing that Governor Malloy and his staff really think about when it comes to economics is how could they raise taxes and
redistribute
and get more money from the citizens of Connecticut. I think it starts and ends there. And my next question to you is, with being endorsed by Art Laffer, which is a supply-side economic storyline, and there's lots of people in favor of it, but there's lots of negative connotations driven by the media and perhaps by some ignorance. If you want to pursue that through the campaign, how do you educate the population about the merits of what you're talking about? I'm a finance guy, and if we were at UBS, a lot of the terms you're going to use and the theory you're going to point to will be understood. Even if they don't agree to it, they're going to understand it. But how do you communicate to the population to draw them to your side?
I think it's always helpful to have the facts on your side. And in our case, the facts are on our side. If you look at the state of Connecticut, in the 15 years before Lowell Weicker put what was supposed to be a temporary income tax in 1991, we were the fastest growing economy in the nation. People were living in Connecticut and commuting into New York because New York had a state sales tax and Connecticut didn't. And the tax revenues coming out of that part of the state were amazing. In the 25 years since Weicker put that tax in, we're last in economic growth and the fourth worst in job creation. So how the Democrats can come out and say, if you just let me add this last new tax, things are suddenly going to be different. It's insane what these people are saying. We're the perfect example of how tax and spend doesn't work. And I think if you can keep people focused on the facts, rather than the rhetoric coming out of Hartford and all these career politicians, just like I've done in the business sector, you can rally them around a cause and get them to see common sense. At the end of the day, it's common sense. And most, not all, but most of the politicians I've met don't have a lot of common sense sometimes.
Well, Bob, speaking of your race for the governorship, it's a packed field. I mean, it's got to be like what it's like. I think it's 8 pages. I just printed it out. Okay, not environmentally sound, but I did it anyway. Where do you stand now? I know it's too early for the polls really to have any merit. And how are you going to cut through the clutter?
Well, there's 32 candidates, right? There's a couple things that distinguish me. Number one, I'm the only one with an economic plan. You look at any one of the other websites, there's no plan up there. Never mind one endorsed by Arthur Laffer. Number two, I'm the only candidate up on statewide TV right now. I'm on Fox News. I'm on the Sunday shows. That's given me great name recognition.
And on the Buzz.
And on the Buzz. Number three, I'm one of only 2 or 3 candidates that's not asking the taxpayers to pay for my campaign. And a lot of people don't know this, but most of the candidates running, if they get into the primary, they're going to ask the taxpayers for $1.2 million to run their campaign, to buy bumper stickers, to buy yard signs. And if they get into the general, they're going to ask for $6 million. So think about that for a minute. We're in a state with a $3.5 billion budget deficit, and you're going to have a bunch of politicians running around using taxpayer money to tell you how broken the state is. It's I don't know what the right word is. Insane, embarrassing, but how politicians are going to run and take your and my money, taxpayer money, to run their campaigns, I don't know how we get into this situation.
Well, one thing that intrigues me, it really does, just from an intellectual standpoint, I don't understand how any Democrat is going to run. I mean, there's tons of them running, but what do you do? Just run away from the current governor and just dismiss the whole legislature? I mean, what do you do? That's a Houdini magic act, if you ask me.
I don't know how you run away from the facts, and I fundamentally believe, whether it's the poll or people I talk to as I travel throughout the state, the number one issue is jobs and the economy. And there's absolutely no way any Democrat can get up and say the last 8 years of Dan Malloy that economic policy has worked. You simply can't say it.
No, you can't. Chris, final question.
Yeah, I would just like to dovetail on Jeff's point, because you mentioned your belief that facts are on your side.
Yes.
And I tend to agree with you, so let's stipulate that. The press, though, is problematic, and you see this on the national stage. You've mentioned Donald Trump. How do you get past the media, who are, in my opinion, this is not anything you said, this is my words now, is they're going to block you at every turn, and they're probably going to allow the Democrats to just run a negative campaign.
Well, Chris, let me interject it because I like that question, and I think we spoke off air about this. I think I know they're going to pay, if he rises, which I think he will. Yeah, they're going to look at his turnarounds. If people got laid off, paint him as a heartless business person without compassion. Sure, I think that's going to be the narrative, Bob.
I don't know. I mean, being successful in business is not really that much different than being successful in government. I would hope that the press would give me credibility or some appreciation for that. I've actually run large organizations. I've made them prosper. I've turned them around. Yes, part of it is cost cutting, and at the state level, we're going to have to cut some costs. But having leadership, having a plan, driving people around a cause. I've run big, troubled organizations my entire life. The state of Connecticut is a perfect example of a big, troubled organization that needs to be turned around.
I could probably be the poster child for that. Well, Bob, you've been a great guest, okay? Bob Stefanowski, he's running for governor of the state of Connecticut on the Republican side. For our listeners out there that would like to get more information, possibly contribute to your campaign or help you get out the message, how can they do that?
The best place is bobforgovernor.com. We got a full website. We got my biography. We got an economic plan. I would encourage your viewers to go up there and take a look.
Bob Stefanowski, thanks so much for being on The Buzz. You're a great guest, correct, Chris?
Absolutely. It was a pleasure having you on today. It was a good discussion.
And don't be a stranger.
Okay, you're terrific. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.